A routine traffic stop in Fairview Heights, Missouri, took an unexpected turn when Officer Mark Harris realized who was behind the wheel. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden hue over the peaceful, tree-lined streets of the suburban neighborhood, where birds chirped and the gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Olivia Thompson, an accomplished African-American woman in her early 40s, was driving home from a work meeting. Her car, a sleek black Tesla, glided effortlessly down the road. It was one of those moments when she felt a quiet sense of pride for how far she'd come in life. The road was clear, and she appreciated the solitude as the car hummed smoothly under her control. But just as she took a deep breath, savoring the calm, everything changed. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in her rear-view mirror, breaking the tranquility. The high-pitched wail of a siren pierced through the otherwise peaceful air, sending a sharp jolt of adrenaline through her body. Olivia's heart rate spiked, not from fear but from frustration. She had done nothing wrong. She checked her speedometer, confirming she was well below the speed limit. Her hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel, but she quickly reminded herself to stay composed. She had learned over the years that her calmness was often her greatest strength in moments like this. With a deep sigh, she signaled and slowly pulled over to the side of the road, bringing the car to a gentle stop. The sounds of the street faded as she focused on her breathing, trying to steady herself. The patrol car rolled to a stop behind her. She glanced at the rear-view mirror, where she saw Officer Mark Harris, tall and broad-shouldered, step out of his vehicle. The crunch of his boots on the gravel shoulder echoed in the otherwise silent air as he approached her car. His uniform was pressed, his badge gleaming in the light, and his posture was rigid, projecting an air of authority that Olivia could immediately sense. Olivia pressed the button to roll down her window. Her expression was calm, yet there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. She kept her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, not out of fear, but out of habit. She knew the drill. Before she could say anything, the officer leaned down toward her window, peering into the car with a gaze that felt almost too intense, as though he was assessing her every move. "License and registration," he said curtly, his tone clipped, authoritative, and devoid of any courtesy. There was no greeting, no small talk, just a demand. Olivia's fingers moved smoothly as she retrieved her documents, her movements measured. She didn't feel the need to rush. She had done nothing wrong. After handing them over, she spoke in a calm but firm voice, her professionalism clear. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" For a brief moment there was a flicker of annoyance in the officer's eyes, but his expression remained hardened. He narrowed his gaze, his lips tightening. "I'll be asking the questions here. Step out of the vehicle." The command was abrupt and completely devoid of context. No explanation, no reasoning. Olivia hesitated, not out of defiance, but because she knew the law. She had every right to stay in her vehicle until she was given a valid reason for stepping out. The silence between them stretched, heavy and tense. She could feel his irritation building. Her pause seemed to fuel it further. "I said step out of the vehicle," he barked, his voice rising with authority, loud enough to draw the attention of a few pedestrians walking nearby. Olivia locked eyes with him, her gaze steady, her hands gripping the steering wheel just a bit tighter. She wasn't about to give in so easily, but she knew this was only the beginning. Her silence spoke volumes. It left the air thick with unspoken tension, making it clear that this encounter was far from over. Officer Harris's posture stiffened further as he noticed Olivia's refusal to comply. His hand shifted subtly, resting near the holster of his gun, though he didn't draw it. It was enough, however, to send a silent, unmistakable message. Olivia noticed the motion, but didn't flinch. She kept her gaze unflinching, her face a mask of calm. She had been in situations like this before, and she knew the importance of maintaining control, even in moments like this. "Officer, I'm happy to comply," Olivia said, her voice steady yet firm, "but only if you can provide a valid reason for asking me to step out." Her words were measured, confident, and without hesitation. He leaned closer, his jaw tightening, his voice lowering to a near growl. "You're acting suspicious. This is my call, and I don't have to explain myself to you." His dismissiveness was loud enough to be felt, and Olivia could sense the authority he was trying to project, but she wasn't intimidated. Not by him, not by anyone. She inhaled deeply, exhaling slowly as she made her decision. Olivia unlocked the car door and stepped out, standing tall despite the officer's imposing figure. She was dressed in a navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, her appearance immaculate. She knew how she looked, composed, poised, and confident. If Officer Harris had noticed, it didn't seem to faze him. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, stepping back slightly, as though expecting her to make a sudden move. Olivia complied, raising her hand slightly, though the gesture felt both unnecessary and humiliating. She could feel the eyes of the small crowd that had gathered at a distance, their murmurs growing louder. "You're driving an expensive car in an area where we don't see too many visitors," he said, letting the implication hang in the air like a weight. Olivia's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral, not giving him the satisfaction of showing her anger. "Are you saying I don't belong here?" she asked, her voice sharp but controlled. Officer Harris smirked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm saying it's my job to make sure everything checks out." "Where are you headed, ma'am?" "Home," she replied simply. "I live here." The officer raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "Is that so? Care to prove it?" Before Olivia could respond, a woman from the crowd shouted, "Leave her alone! She hasn't done anything!" Officer Harris whipped around, glaring at the onlookers. "Mind your own business," he snapped, his voice harsh and full of frustration. Olivia saw the opening. "Officer," she said coolly, "I'd like to remind you that I am fully cooperating, but your behavior is unprofessional and inappropriate. If you have nothing further, I'd like to go." His face reddened, a mix of embarrassment and growing anger. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near growl. "You don't tell me how to do my job." But Olivia wasn't backing down. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone watching could feel it. The encounter was approaching a breaking point. Olivia didn't flinch under the officer's simmering glare. She had dealt with men like him before, men who thought authority gave them the right to belittle and intimidate. But Olivia also knew the power of remaining composed, and that every word, every gesture had the potential to shift the course of the situation. Every moment of silence was a choice, and right now Olivia chose to let Officer Harris dig his own hole. She stood still, her expression unwavering as she allowed the tension to build around them. Every second that passed, she knew she was winning this battle of wills. "Officer," Olivia began, her voice calm but edged with steel, "I'm well aware of my rights. Unless you have probable cause or evidence that I've committed an offense, you have no grounds to detain me." Her words were measured, deliberate, and sharp. The gathered crowd murmured in approval, emboldened by her unflinching confidence. Olivia's resolve had a way of making others stand taller, speak louder, and believe they could stand up against authority too. But Officer Harris, on the other hand, looked like a kettle about to boil over. He straightened his posture, trying to regain control, to assert his dominance. "I don't need a lecture on the law from you," he snapped. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. She tilted her head slightly, her expression still calm, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "You think you can talk your way out of this because you're—" He stopped himself, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Olivia didn't flinch. She met his eyes directly, the challenge clear. "Because I'm what, officer? Educated, successful, black?" The last word landed like a thunderclap. A sudden hush fell over the small crowd as they processed what she had said. Harris's face darkened. He opened his mouth to respond, but Olivia didn't give him the chance. "You should know," she continued, her tone unwavering, "that I have no problem escalating this if necessary. This encounter is being documented." She subtly gestured toward the discreet dashcam mounted on her windshield. Harris's eyes flicked toward the camera, his bravado faltering for the first time. The power dynamic was beginning to shift, and he could feel it. "You can't intimidate me," he muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Olivia's voice softened, but her words carried a firm weight. "I'm not trying to intimidate you, officer. I'm trying to hold you accountable." For a moment it seemed as though Harris might back off. His eyes darted between Olivia, the camera, and the watching crowd, but his pride wouldn't let him. He stepped closer, his broad frame invading her personal space. "You're playing a dangerous game," he warned, his voice low enough that only Olivia could hear. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her gaze was unwavering as she met his challenge head-on. "And so are you." The weight of her words hung heavily between them. Harris's hand twitched at his side, his confidence visibly cracking. But Olivia knew the storm wasn't over. She could see it in his restless eyes. The flicker of doubt mixed with fury. The air felt dense with tension, as the officer's ego clashed with the reality that his authority was slipping away. The crowd, though silent, seemed to hum with anticipation. They sensed the changing tides, and Olivia knew it was time to tip the scales. "Officer Harris," Olivia began, her voice cutting through the silence like the toll of a bell. "Do you know who I am?" Harris sneered, trying to mask his unease with defiance. "I don't care who you are." Olivia took a small step closer, her calmness unnerving. "You should. I'm Olivia Thompson, head of internal affairs for the state of Missouri." Her words hit like a thunderclap, and the weight of them reverberated through the small crowd. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, and for the first time, Harris' face betrayed a flicker of panic before he quickly masked it with a forced scowl. "You're lying," he said, though his voice faltered. Olivia didn't flinch. "Feel free to verify it. Call your station. Pull up my credentials. I oversee the conduct of every officer in this state, including you." Harris's bravado cracked like thin ice under pressure. He took a step back, his mind racing, but his body betrayed his disbelief. His hand dropped from his holster as he awkwardly shifted, suddenly aware of the cameras, the crowd, and the damning nature of his behavior. "This entire interaction has been recorded," Olivia said, her voice calm but with an edge of authority that demanded attention. "Your actions will be reviewed, your conduct scrutinized, and I will personally ensure that justice is served." Harris's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had no clever comeback, no way to regain control of the situation. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone watching could see it. One of the bystanders, a young man with his phone raised, shouted, "Yeah, you better listen to her." The crowd murmured in agreement, emboldened by Olivia's quiet strength. Harris took another step back, now visibly sweating. I didn't mean any disrespect," he stammered, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Your actions say otherwise, officer. I suggest you reflect on that." For the first time, Harris looked small, his earlier arrogance replaced by palpable discomfort. Olivia didn't gloat. She didn't revel in his humiliation. Instead, she turned her attention to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over them, silently acknowledging the impact of what had just happened. "You all can go home now," Olivia said gently, her voice calm but firm. "There's nothing more to see here." The onlookers began to disperse, but not without casting a few lingering glances at Officer Harris, whose shoulders sagged under the weight of his own actions. Olivia watched him retreat to his patrol car, but she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much-needed reckoning. Officer Harris sat in his patrol car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths as his mind raced through the events that had just unfolded. The words Olivia had spoken kept playing over and over in his head, each repetition chipping away at the confidence he had clung to earlier. "I oversee the conduct of every officer in this state, including you." The sentence reverberated in his mind, weighing down on him. He still couldn't escape the harsh truth in her voice. He looked out the window, unable to shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at him. He fumbled with his radio, likely confirming her identity, though he didn't need to hear the response. Olivia's posture, calm and resolute, told him everything he needed to know. She had been through far worse and was never going to let this slide. Minutes passed before Harris exited his vehicle, his once commanding demeanor now subdued. He approached Olivia with his head slightly lowered, his earlier arrogance replaced by something closer to shame. "Miss Thompson," he began hesitantly, his voice quieter now. "I've spoken to my superiors. I understand who you are now." Olivia met his gaze, her expression calm yet unyielding. "Good, then you understand the gravity of what just happened." Harris nodded stiffly, struggling to regain his composure. I apologize if I overstepped." Olivia's eyes remained steady, studying him carefully. "Overstepped, officer? What you did wasn't just a simple overstep, it was an abuse of power, rooted in bias and intimidation." She took a step closer, her voice unwavering. "Do you even realize how dangerous your actions could have been?" Harris opened his mouth to respond, but quickly closed it. The weight of her words sank in, and for the first time he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Olivia continued, her tone resolute. "As an officer of the law, you're sworn to protect and serve. Yet today you chose to profile and harass. Imagine if I hadn't been in the position I'm in. Imagine if I had been someone without the means or knowledge to defend myself." Harris's shoulders slumped as the realization of his actions crashed down on him. He looked down at the ground, unable to meet her eyes. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I was wrong." Olivia nodded, acknowledging his admission, but her voice remained firm. "Acknowledging your mistake is a start, but it's not enough. You need to reflect on why you acted the way you did and take steps to change. This isn't just about you, it's about the system you represent." The crowd had long since dispersed, leaving the two of them standing in the fading light of the afternoon. Harris nodded again, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll do better." Olivia took a step back toward her car, opening the driver's side door. She turned to him one last time, her gaze unwavering. "I'll be watching to make sure you do, and believe me, Officer Harris, I'll hold you accountable if you don't." As she slid into her seat, Harris remained rooted to the spot, the full weight of the moment settling on him. Olivia drove off, leaving behind a man who now had to face not only the consequences of his actions, but the deeper flaws within himself. As Olivia made her way home, the tension of the encounter began to dissipate. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, her expression steady but thoughtful. This wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, and it likely wouldn't be the last, but today felt different. Today, she hadn't just defended herself. She had sent a message. Accountability wasn't optional. Back at the precinct, Officer Harris sat alone in the break room, replaying every word Olivia had said. The echoes of her calm yet forceful voice haunted him, and he knew that this moment would stay with him long after the shift was over. The deeper implications of what he had done, what he had allowed himself to do, were beginning to hit him harder than anything he had felt before. Her calm authority had shaken him in a way he didn't expect. For years, Officer Harris had operated under assumptions, never questioning the biases that guided his actions. His badge, his uniform, and his position of power had made him feel invincible. But now the harsh reality stared back at him, unavoidably clear. His badge didn't make him right, and his power wasn't an excuse to demean others. Angela's words echoed in his mind. "Imagine if I hadn't been in the position I'm in. Imagine if I had been someone without the means or knowledge to defend myself." The weight of her words sank in deeply. For the first time, Harris realized how often his decisions could have caused harm to those who didn't have the same privilege, the same resources, or the same voice. His mind began to shift. It wasn't just about the immediate consequences of his actions. It was about the deeper responsibility that came with his job. He couldn't hide behind his badge any longer. He couldn't ignore the truth. He had a duty to protect and serve. But that duty also meant holding himself accountable to the community he had sworn to serve. And for the first time he felt a genuine desire to do better, not out of fear, but out of a sense of responsibility. Meanwhile, Olivia parked in her driveway, the familiar weight of the day's events still on her shoulders. As she stepped out of her car, the evening breeze brushed against her face, cooling the tension that had built up in her chest. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky as the stars began to appear, twinkling in the deepening blue of the evening. Her work was far from over, but there was a sense of purpose in the stillness of the moment. Change didn't come all at once, and progress was often messy, but moments like this reminded her why she fought so hard to challenge injustice. She had made a difference today, and that made it all worthwhile. Her story wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or underestimated. Olivia knew the power of speaking up, of standing firm, and of holding others accountable, even when it made them uncomfortable. It wasn't about making people feel bad. It was about creating real change, even when the path forward seemed uncertain. As she walked inside her house, a sense of determination fueled her steps. This wasn't just a battle she had won, it was a step towards something greater, a movement for change that rippled far beyond the precinct. Her encounter with Officer Harris would leave an impact not just within the walls of the police department, but on the community at large. She knew the lesson was clear. True power wasn't in authority, it was in accountability. Justice, no matter how delayed, always had its moment, and today that moment had come. As the evening settled around her, Olivia reflected on the power of moments like this. They may not always be easy, but they were necessary. Every step forward was a victory, no matter how small. She had made a stand today, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless. If this story moved you, don't let the conversation end here. Share this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us all of the power we hold to make a difference.